tué mon grand frère. Vous l'avez tué. Vous l'avez tué.
S'il vous plaît, on va pas y arriver, s'il vous plaît.
La mafia, vous allez payer de
Non, il n'y a pas de mafia.
C'est fini.
On est des travailleurs, on est des travailleurs. On prendra nos responsabilités.
Pardon, mais oublie. Mon fils est mort. Mon fils est mort. Il était brûlé.
Vous avez tué mon grand frère, vous êtes salope, vous comprenez? Non, regardez-moi dans les yeux. Vous avez tué mon frère.
On va assumer, on vous le promet, on est là pour la
Vous avez
justice.
tué quelqu'un.
Hey, you need to get your stuff ordered. It's a big disappointment of watching commercial. Okay, so what you're watching here now is actually my new scalping system where I actually pick up news, right? So you can see the dots here, like you have the spiderweb connection. So it always checks different APIs from news headers, so we are always up to date. Some news are old, right? That it will randomly, so I can randomly pick if I want to. Right now you are seeing automatically what's happening is the system itself now, it's actually taking its own decision for what he wants to show us, right? So what you're seeing on the screens are news from 50 different selection he can pick from, and it's from everywhere. It's from Africa, Asia, America, Europe. It can be from France, Germany, whatever, as long as it's English, right? So this is what we are watching right now. Yeah, so it's no commercial stuff what I'm actually showing here. It is actually picking, like this one now, he's picking
President
something.
Cyril Ramaphosa has declared foot and mouth disease, which is devastating the farming economy, a national disaster.
Yeah, so he's picking, as you can see. So this is what it's going, right? And then he closes it and then he picks something else. Yeah.
Most middle powers are now at their most open period to work with others to diversify outside of the U.S. and China, says political analyst James Chai. Kuala Lumpur, chemistry between leaders matters a lot in bilateral relations. So it helps that Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi was friends with Anwar Ibrahim before the latter became the Malaysian Prime Minister. Mr. Modi had promised his dear friend that he would go to Malaysia after missing the star-studded ASEAN summit in Kuala Lumpur in October 2025. and he made it his first foreign visit in 2026. Mr. Anwar made sure Mr. Modi felt welcome by preparing a ceremonial welcome and send-off complete with Guard of Honor with the 1st Battalion from the Royal Malay Regiment, students waving Indian flags, and cultural performances. It also helped that both leaders shared their love for the Tamil language and actor M.G. Ramachandran. At home, Mr. Anwar always talked of his love for Indian culture and literature, including how much the Sanskrit epics Mahabharata and Ramayana influenced him during his time in prison. Anwar sings very well, Mr. Modi said on stage. This is not a trivial detail in today's fragmenting world. These personal connections were arguably why Malaysia was able to attract so many world leaders to KL last year. This goodwill helps mobilize trade deals and partnerships beyond pure economic considerations. Malaysia's 3 million Indian population is the third largest Indian overseas community. The people-to-people ties in tourism, education, and cultural exchanges formed the backdrop to bilateral trade steadily increasing to nearly $18 6 billion in 2025. Malaysia certainly has value to offer. In recent years, India was the largest market for Malaysian palm oil exports, a crucial item that affects the cost of food. At the same time, India's recent semiconductor mission could benefit from Malaysia's partnership as it had a 50-year head start in back-end manufacturing with the support of multinationals, the pioneering companies that established operations in the early 1970s, locally known as the Eight Samurai. That is why these were the standout items in the Memorandums of Understanding signed, besides reaffirming their comprehensive strategic partnership since 2024 that also covers defense, education, trade, and culture. However, for a mid-sized economy like Malaysia, it is sometimes less about what it has and more about the larger story it represents. These India-Malaysia agreements are a prelude to a larger India-ASEAN deal, an upgraded ASEAN-India trade in goods. President Cyril Ramaphosa has announced the deployment of the South African National Defence Force to help fight gangsterism. Published 11:11 Eastern Standard Time, February 12, 2026 updated. 12:20 Eastern Standard Time, February 12, 2026. A masked thief was seen in footage stealing gold from a jewelry shop before making his escape on a donkey. The incident took place in the Melikotsi district in Kayseri, central Turkey, on February 9th. CCTV footage captured the suspect, later identified as Mehmet C. 26, driving a stolen forklift directly into a shopfront and repeatedly ramming the metal shutters until they buckled and gave way. Wearing a beanie and a surgical mask to conceal his face, he then climbed into the store. The clip shows the suspect moving towards a display area, knocking over a counter, and reaching into the showcases before calmly placing gold jewelry into his pocket. Further footage shows the man leaving the scene and fleeing the area on a getaway donkey, which had been left standing outside the shop during the theft. Police said he had arrived in the area on the animal before using the forklift to break into the store. Approximately 150 g of gold jewelry was stolen during the break-in. CCTV footage captured the suspect, later identified as Mehmet C. 26, driving a stolen forklift directly into a shopfront and repeatedly ramming the metal shutters until they buckled and gave way. In an interview with The Atlantic, the president said that there is no greater victory for Trump than to stop the war between Russia and Ukraine, adding that for his legacy, it's number one. President Volodymyr Zelensky told the U.S. media outlet Atlantic that there could be no greater victory for U.S. President Donald Trump than ending Russia's full-scale war in Ukraine in an interview published on Thursday. Trump has long promised to bring an end to Russia's war in Ukraine, frequently claiming that if he, rather than his predecessor Joe Biden, had been in power when Russia launched its 2022 full-scale invasion, it would never have happened. In fact, before Trump was re-elected in January 2025, he promised to end Russia's war in less than 24 hours. Speaking to The Atlantic's Simon Schuster on Wednesday in Kiev, Zelensky said he believed there is no greater victory for Trump than to stop the war between Russia and Ukraine, adding that for his legacy, it's number one. The fact that Trump is preoccupied with his legacy and with being viewed as a peacemaker is no secret. The U.S. president has repeatedly and falsely claimed to have ended at least 8 wars. Nor did he take it well when the Nobel Prize Committee snubbed him for the 2025 Peace Prize in favor of Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado for her efforts to promote democracy in her home country. Text messages from Trump to Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Store leaked to the press on Jan. 19 suggest that being passed over for the prize had significantly impacted Donald Tusk made the remarks on Tuesday during a visit to the PGZ Naval Shipyard in Gdynia, a major Polish port on the Baltic Sea. Poland has a real chance to dominate the Baltic Sea, the country's prime minister has said, lauding naval modernization plans and new partnerships as crucial to strengthening NATO's presence in one of Europe's most strategically sensitive regions. Donald Tusk made the remarks on Tuesday during a visit to the PGZ Naval Shipyard in Gdynia, a major Polish port on the Baltic Sea, where 3 modern frigates and a specialized rescue vessel are being built as part of flagship investment programs.
For many Bangladeshis, this vote was a first, their first time ever casting a ballot, or the first time taking part in an election widely seen as fair.
17 years there was only one government. I want something different, like someone who will make this country more developed in front of the whole world.
We felt we had no other option.
President Cyril Ramaphosa has announced he will establish a National Water Crisis Committee, which he will chair, to tackle the country's ongoing water crisis. Milano Cortina 2026 Olympics. Figure skating, ice dance, free dance. Milano Ice Skating Arena, Milan, Italy. February 11, 2026. Madison Chock of United States and Evan Bates of United States perform during the free dance Reuters/Fabrizio Bench. Milan, February 12th. Triple World Ice Dance champions Madison Chock and Evan Bates will leave the Milano Cortina Olympics with silver medals, but also an outpouring of support from fans questioning the judging that denied them gold. Debate around Wednesday night's ice dance victory by French duo Laurence Fournier-Baudry and Guillaume Cizerin has sparked a petition on change, or calling for the International Skating Union to review the scoring. Despite the swirl around them, Chock and Bates said on Thursday they were holding tight to the emotion of their performance and the belief it was the strongest of their career. We haven't studied the scoring in depth, but we did speak to our coach and we did talk to each other, and we know how we felt on center ice after we skated, Bates, 36, said. We felt like we delivered our absolute best performance that we could have. It was our Olympic moment. It felt like a winning skate to us, and that's what... The fortress built by Washington to keep Chinese electric vehicles out is no longer looking so impregnable, says an analyst. Melbourne. The fortress built by Washington to keep Chinese electric vehicles out is no longer looking so impregnable. On many metrics, certainly scale and affordability, Chinese companies are well ahead of the rest when it comes to manufacturing electric vehicles, EVs. Yet the United States, long since overtaken by China as the world's largest auto market, is far too sizable to ignore for any global manufacturer. it remains the world's biggest market for imported vehicles by a considerable margin. The interconnection between geopolitics, national security, and industrial policy has so far precluded Chinese EVs from meaningfully entering the U.S. market. Tariffs of 100% imposed during the Biden administration are a blunt instrument. The Chinese auto sector's growing overcapacity and vicious price wars have seen companies, such as BYD, introduce budget models priced at around $8,000 in China. Ukraine's Air Force said Russia had launched 125 attack drones since 6 p.m. on February 9, including Shahid, Gerbera, Italmaz, and other uncrewed aerial vehicles. Russian forces attacked Vilniansk in Ukraine's Zaporizhia region with drones early Tuesday, February 10, injuring several people, including a 1-year-old child. Ukraine State Emergency Service, DSNS, reported on Telegram. Russian drones attacked settlements in the Zaporizhia district. Fires broke out at several addresses due to shelling. Residential buildings were burning. Nearby buildings were damaged by the blast wave. At one location, emergency responders freed 2 women and 2 children aged 1 and 10 after forcing open a door damaged by the explosion. Zaporizhia Regional Military Administration (OVA) head Ivan Fedorov confirmed the strike. The Russians attacked Vilniansk with drones. Private houses and outbuildings were damaged. 2 women, a man, and a boy who was not even 2 years old were injured, he said. Russia also struck Ukraine's energy sector in the Odessa region, damaging Published 8:41 Eastern Standard Time, October 30th, 2012. Updated 5:05 Eastern Standard Time, November 1st, 2012. A Bolivian radio presenter was set on fire by 4 masked men while hosting his show in the southern city of Iquiba. Radio popular journalist Fernando Vidal, 78, is being treated for burns after his attackers broke into the studio, poured petrol over him, and set him alight. By naming sectors and framing missions, Budget 2026 shows how Singapore intends to turn AI into meaningful productivity gains, says U.S Business School's Sumit Agrawal. File photo of software developers writing code. File photo, iStock. Singapore. Over the past year, artificial intelligence, AI, has been everywhere. In policy speeches, boardrooms, university seminars, and dinner conversations. Milano Cortina 2026 Olympics, short track speed skating, women's 500-meter, semifinals, Milano Ice Skating Arena, Milan, Italy, February 12, 2026. Xandra Velzeboer of Netherlands in action during the semifinal one. Reuters/Yara Nardi. Hume wins 30 votes to 20 against Ted O'Brien, with one person again voting informally. Aaron Violi and Wendy Askew, the chief whip and deputy whip, announced the results. This morning, there was a spill motion for the leadership of the Liberal Party of Australia. That motion was successful. A ballot was conducted for the leadership. There was 2 candidates, Susan Ley and Angus Taylor. And Angus Taylor was successful, 33 votes to 17, and is now the leader.
If you are not privy to the naming convention of these warrior cat characters, the nomenclature of these cat names follows a simple 2-part system. Every cat's name is made up of any of these prefixes and any of these suffixes.
When you look at Lebanon, how optimistic are you in seeing Hezbollah fully de-armed and disbanded as the Trump administration has demanded?
I'm really probably more optimistic than most people because I'm
More than just skiing, the town has a reputation of enticing the European jet set with its food, shops, and design-oriented hotels. Cortina, one of the two main hosts of the Winter Olympics 2026, has a reputation for attracting the European jet set who come for the culinary, retail, and hospitality experiences. Report on Islamic State says Ahmed al-Shura was targeted twice by IS front group that bombed Damascus church. 5 separate plots to assassinate Syria's president or his senior ministers were foiled last year, the UN has said in a report on Islamic State. According to the report, the Syrian president, Ahmed al-Shura, was targeted twice, once in northern Aleppo and another time in southern Dara, by Suraya Ansar al-Sunna, an IS front group that carried out a bombing of a church in Damascus last summer. A separate regional intelligence official also confirmed last autumn that Shura had faced assassination attempts that were foiled after Syria's security establishment was provided with intelligence from a neighboring country on the plots. IS has stepped up its recruitment of maker of chatbot boasting coding ability, said annualized revenue grew tenfold in each of Web links to Kiev Post material are allowed provided that they contain a hyperlink to the stories and only a brief extract, not more than 10% of the text. All materials, including photographs, contained on this site are protected by copyright law and may A young Hindu tea garden worker's blood-soaked body was found with his hands and legs tied in the Mulvabazar area of northeast Bangladesh, a media report said Thursday, February 12, 2026. Ahead of the voting for the 13th parliamentary elections in the country, this is the second murder of a Hindu person in as many days. Police recovered the body of 28-year-old Ratan Shivokar from the tea garden about 200 kilometers northeast of Dhaka on Wednesday, February 11, 2026. A photograph shows an anti-U.S. billboard displayed on a building in Tehran's Balyasar Square. Photo credit: AFP. The death toll from a crackdown over Iran's nationwide protests last month has reached at least 7,002 people killed, with many more still feared dead, activists said on Thursday, February 12, 2026. The U.S. based human rights activists news agency, which offered the latest figures, has been accurate in counting deaths during previous rounds of unrest in Iran and relies on a network of activists in Iran to verify deaths. The slow rise in the death toll has come as the agency slowly is able to cross-check information as communication remains difficult with those inside of the Islamic Republic. Iran's government offered its only death toll on January 21st, saying 3,117 people were killed. Iran's theocracy in the past has undercounted or not reported fatalities from past unrest. The Associated Press has been unable to independently assess the death toll, given authorities have disrupted internet access and international calls in Iran. The rise in the death toll comes as Iran tries to negotiate with the United States over its nuclear program. seem
Hind Rajab in Gaza and Virginia Giuffre, who survived Epstein Island, are both, in very different ways, but they are both victims of that transnational oligarchy which exploits human life, either very directly for profit or for gratification and entertainment. And people in Gaza are at the sharp end of an economic system that seeks to benefit big tech, real estate, and so on. The victims on Epstein Island were used as zoo animals or for sexual gratification or for entertainment by the beneficiaries of that system of profit making and plunder and violence in Gaza.
A diplomatic standoff inches towards crisis. Iran has drawn a firm red line, declaring its ballistic missile capabilities non-negotiable in talks with the United States, a position that hasn't gone down very well in Jerusalem. As Washington and Tehran prepare for further negotiations, Israel is pushing the U.S. to broaden the agenda, including missiles and regional proxies. And Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is in Washington to press that case. With the U.S. beefing up its military presence in the region and no breakthrough yet in sight, the question hanging is, can diplomacy succeed, or is the region on the brink of a bigger confrontation? Coming up next on Counterpoints. As Washington flirts with the idea of a narrow nuclear deal with Tehran, alarm bells are ringing in Jerusalem. For Israel, an agreement that caps uranium enrichment but ignores Iran's ballistic missile program and leaves untouched its support for armed groups across the region isn't diplomacy, it's déjà vu. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is expected to carry that warning straight to the White House on Wednesday, pressing Donald Trump not to settle for what Israel sees as a dangerously incomplete bargain. Iran sees any limitations on its missile program as an existential risk, given it has no other means to deter Israel from attacking the country without them. On this episode of Counterpoints, we'll discuss whether Israel is trying to persuade the U.S. to take military action, whether Iran is weaker or stronger than it appears at this stage, and what exactly is causing an impasse in negotiations. And will there be a new deal? Joining us for tonight's discussion is Liane Polak-David, strategic consultant and former advisor at the Prime Minister Netanyahu's office and the Israeli National Security Council, Brandon Weichert, senior national security editor at 1945, and finally Kieran Andrew, political commentator and doctor of political economy. Welcome to Counterpoints. So Iran says its missile program is non-negotiable. Israel says missiles must be part of any deal. Negotiations continue, and now the Israeli Prime Minister is in Washington. Let's go straight to it. Liane, we're going to start with you. Why is Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in the U.S. right now? Is he trying to persuade President Donald Trump into a wider regional war?
Well, if a good deal was possible, then that would have been the ideal outcome. But unfortunately, this is probably not the case. President Trump,
a diplomatic standoff inches towards crisis. Iran has drawn a firm red line, declaring its ballistic missile capabilities non-negotiable in talks with the United States, a position that hasn't gone down very well in Jerusalem. As Washington and Tehran prepare for further negotiations, Israel is pushing the U.S. to broaden the agenda, including missiles and regional proxies. And Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is in Washington to press that case. With the U.S. beefing up its military presence in the region and no breakthrough yet in sight, the question hanging is, can diplomacy succeed, or is the region on the brink of a bigger confrontation? Coming up next on Counterpoints. As Washington flirts with the idea of a narrow nuclear deal with Tehran, alarm bells are ringing in Jerusalem. For Israel, an agreement that caps uranium enrichment but ignores Iran's ballistic missile program and leaves untouched its support for armed groups across the region isn't diplomacy, it's déjà vu. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is expected to carry that warning straight to the White House on Wednesday, pressing Donald Trump not to settle for what Israel sees as a dangerously incomplete bargain. Iran sees any limitations on its missile program as an existential risk, given it has no other means to deter Israel from attacking the country without them. On this episode of Counterpoints, we'll discuss whether Israel is trying to persuade the U.S. to take military action, whether Iran is weaker or stronger than it appears at this stage, and what exactly is causing an impasse in negotiations. And will there be a new deal? Joining us for tonight's discussion is Liane Polak-David, strategic consultant and former advisor at the Prime Minister Netanyahu's office and the Israeli National Security Council, Brandon Weichert, senior national security editor at 1945, and finally Kieran Andrew, political commentator and doctor of political economy. Welcome to Counterpoints. So Iran says its missile program is non-negotiable. Israel says missiles must be part of any deal. Negotiations continue, and now the Israeli Prime Minister is in Washington. Let's go straight to it. Leanne, we're going to start with you. Why is Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in the U.S. right now? Is he trying to persuade President Donald Trump into a wider regional war?
Well, if a good deal was possible, then that would have been the ideal outcome. But unfortunately, this is probably not the case. President Trump still wants to get to a deal. He's, on one hand, laying out a credible military option on the table with all of the armada that has been sent over surrounding Iran. So that is on one hand. But on the other hand, he leaves still some flexibility or room for negotiation about a deal. He's a deal maker. He likes deals. He believes in deals. And potentially this is still on the table. But Netanyahu is bringing in the realistic perspective, which is it is highly unlikely that Iran will actually agree to a deal that not only Israel, but the entire Western world, I would say, and even the region can agree with. And that means that basically Netanyahu is there to both draw red lines, but also to think about what's next. What happens if the negotiation table fails? What does that actually mean? What is the flexibility that is there for all sides involved? And how do we prepare for that deal to fall, which is likely to be the case?
What do you think, Kieran? Do you think there's no prospects for a good deal here, that it's going to fall through?
I think we should cut right to the chase. This is a war criminal, Benjamin Netanyahu, trying to plead with somebody who, let's be honest, let's cut the crap. Somebody who is trying to distract the American public from the fact that he is mentioned in lots and lots of files for cavorting with, at a moment in time in the past, a convicted paedophile. It is a war criminal consorting with a president, distracting from that, and attempting to create more conflagration in a region that has already experienced so much dislocation and violence because of the state of Israel. Iran is a country of 92 million people. It's a country that doesn't have a nuclear program. And it's being besieged by two countries that do have nuclear programs, one of which, Israel, doesn't confess to the world that it has a nuclear program. It's the only country in the world with a secret nuclear weapons program. It doesn't even have the backbone to fess up to it. So the idea that Iran, that this is somehow, we've come to the end of the road with negotiations and Iran must, either completely put up or shut up and accept bombing, it's a very, very, it's for the birds, and I think it's a very, very disquieting thesis. And I think, again, it comes from an individual who is responsible for war crimes, and an individual who is trying to distract his public with any dust he can kick up in any direction at any time. And I think that anybody who thinks Israel and the United States are fair arbiters in this particular quarrel in the region need to get their head examined, frankly.
Brandon, I see you smiling there. What do you have to say?
Well, I appreciate the honesty. I think that ultimately the fact of the matter is I don't believe these negotiations were ever real. I think this was all a ruse. I know for a fact on January 15th, the president was prepared to initiate bombardment of Iran, and he was pulled back by the Saudis and the Qataris and the Turks because they said, hey, we're not going to be involved. If the Iranians unleash a missile barrage of epic proportions, which Iran will, at both U.S. bases in the region and Israel, we will not use our air defense systems to knock those missiles out. And that stayed Trump's hand. Then again, 2 weekends ago, I know for a fact Trump was ready to pull the trigger again. And it was his own Joint Chiefs of Staff who quietly said, Mr. President, the Chinese are ranging the aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln with their Yaogan satellite constellation. Iran's anti-ship ballistic missiles are not to be laughed at. They're very serious threats to the carrier. We shouldn't go ahead. And now here we are with talk about another aircraft carrier coming in. You've got the largest buildup of C-17 logistics transport planes coming in. We haven't seen this kind of buildup since before Desert Storm in '91. I believe fully that the Trump administration long ago decided they were going to open up on Iran. I think Israel's coming in to seal the deal. I don't believe for a second that these negotiations are real. And I just think it's very unfortunate, not because I'm pro-Iran. I'm not pro-Iran's government, but it's because the Iranians have built up a very, very, very serious missile capability, hypersonic weapons capability, and drone capability that can and will overwhelm the air defenses of the region, notably if the Arab countries don't intervene. And more importantly, Israel cannot take that kind of missile attack. Their economy is already teetering after the last year's missile attack, and that was a preview of what Iran will do, especially because Iran fully knows that this is not going to be like last summer where the Trump administration did pinprick strikes on nuclear sites. This is going to be a comprehensive regime change mission by another name, and the Iranians will go for broke to basically either stop that from happening or to just as a big FU to the region, because if they're going to go down, they're going to take their enemies down with them.
Before going on to my next question, I want to remind our three guests that if you want to jump in and piggyback on other people's guest responses,
so please allow me to do that if you don't mind.
Of course.
I have to say, regardless of what you may think of Netanyahu and your criticism with regards to his policies and the way that the war was managed in Gaza, this has nothing to do whatsoever with the fact that Iran is not just a threat on Netanyahu himself or on Israel. It is a threat to the region, it is a threat to the world, and it is a threat to its own people. So Trump himself has given a commitment to the Iranian people that help is on the way. Why? Because the Iranian regime is slaughtering its own people. Tens of thousands of people have been slaughtered over the past few weeks, and President Trump has given them a commitment that he's going to help them. So, and nuclear Iran is completely is not a Netanyahu problem, and nuclear Iran is a global and regional problem, and this regime is a problem to its own people. So this is why this claim is completely irrelevant. And
no, it's not irrelevant. You don't need to.
You don't need to do with it.
Yeah. I'll just quickly come in on that. Fair enough that you say that. You don't need to love the Iranian regime to understand that what you just said is geopolitically nonsense, frankly. I know where you sit, people think that, but in the rest of the world, most people unaffiliated maybe with their governments and government institutions, thinks that Israel is the biggest threat in the region. They see that the way that the Israeli government has conducted its genocide in Gaza is completely and utterly at odds with international law. They see that Israel attacks its neighbors very, very routinely, almost perfectly in lockstep with election cycles, that it is tied to political careers and to the election cycle, particularly of Netanyahu. You say it's not a Netanyahu problem. Netanyahu has been the political figure par excellence in Israel over the past 25, 30 years. That's how long he's been more or less in situ, with a couple of breaks, of course. And so it is, of course, it's time. I mean, you're always telling us it's related. You're always telling us, well, we have to bomb Iran, because even if Iran doesn't directly attack other countries, it has its proxies with Hamas and with Hezbollah. So which is it? Either it's related or it isn't. And actually, what you did in Gaza is considered by international institutions, and as I say, by a majority of international civil society, to be at best a heinous war crime and probably genocide. So I think what you're saying is increasingly hollow in the corridors of power and among audiences internationally. I would just say this as well. Whatever you might think about a nuclear Iran, it doesn't exist. And actually, I don't know what our other guests think or our other guest thinks about the Obama deal. There are a lot of things I dislike Barack Obama on. I think that deal was a perfectly good, a perfectly reasonable piece of statecraft in the region. It capped Iran, more or less, and it meant that there was none of this kind of wargaming that we see going on at the moment, which is terrible for the region and terrible for people in both Iran and indeed in Palestine and in Israel.
So what do our guests think?
The only thing that Iran violated this deal all the time and lied to the international community about it. So, you know, it was a perfect deal. It was simply not really enforced, and it wasn't really
what happened was Trump took.
But look,
actually, what happened? What happened was
the fact that you
let's
are
just have
ignoring,
a little bit of
the fact
Shall
that
we
you
just
are
fact check
ignoring
quickly?
the Iranian regime and it's
I'm not ignoring it. I'm not.
Kieran, we'll let Leanne finish.
And to the region is beyond me.
I'm not ignoring it. I'll just briefly say one thing. First of all, actually, it was Trump tearing up that deal.
Another day, another defence ministers meeting, from the war in Ukraine to the defence of the Arctic. The agenda for this meeting in Brussels: long-term security for Ukraine and protection of Greenland. The defence ministers arrived in Brussels a day after the launch of Arctic Sentry, which is a new NATO mission focused on protection of Greenland. If you look at the optics here, this was very much to show that NATO is doing something to protect the Arctic island. It comes in the wake of those comments from US President Donald Trump that the alliance simply isn't doing enough, and his threats to buy or acquire the island, and also as he shifts his focus away from European security. Sweden pledged more fighter jets for the mission, and collectively the alliance promised another $50 billion in aid for Ukraine. Notably, the US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth didn't attend, sending his deputy instead. This comes after the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, also a no-show at a foreign ministers meeting in December, leading many to suggest that this is yet another indication that America is shifting its focus away from European defence.
A 3.0 NATO that's based a partnership rather than dependency, and really a return to what NATO was originally intended for.
I'm absolutely confident that that flow of vital US equipment into Ukraine will continue to go.
So the big takeaway from today: Europe is pledging an enormous amount of money for Ukraine, as America not necessarily abandons the alliance, but certainly pulls away as it demands that Europe take charge of its own security.
Tom Homan claims success in sanctuary crackdown as federal agents begin drawdown following a wave of protests and 2 deaths. The immigration crackdown in Minnesota that led to mass detentions, protests, and 2 deaths is coming to an end, Border Czar Tom Homan said on Thursday. Democratic Governor Tim Walz said on Tuesday that he expected Operation Metro Surge, which started in December, to end in days, not weeks and months, based on his conversations with senior Trump administration officials. As a result of our efforts here, Minnesota is now less of a sanctuary state for criminals, Homan said at a news conference. I have proposed, and President Trump has concurred, that this surge operation conclude. The Military Export Commission gave Ukrainian weapons manufacturers their first export licenses. Ukrainian defense enterprises have received the first permits to export controlled goods. Chair of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council Rustem Umerov announced on Thursday, February 12. The decision follows a meeting of the Interdepartmental Commission on Military Technical Cooperation and Export Control Policy, a military export executive body that resumed work for the first time after being stalled for 8 months, despite Ukraine's president giving the green light to prepare military exports beforehand. Previously, President Volodymyr Zelensky announced that Ukraine will open 10 weapons export centers across Europe by the end of 2026 and begin producing Ukrainian-made drones in Germany. Umerov noted that the move fulfills a task set by the president to open Ukrainian arms exports in a controlled format. All export decisions remain under strict state supervision, with the needs of the Ukrainian armed forces maintained as the unconditional priority, he wrote in a Telegram post. Currently, the production capacity of the Ukrainian defense industry exceeds $55 billion.
Truth or Fake brings us Vedika Bahal here in the studio. Vedika, as always, great to see you.
Hello.
France calling for the resignation of Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur for the Palestinian territories, over anti-Semitic comments that she allegedly made targeting Israel. So tell us, what's the story behind this?
Well, Mark, on Wednesday, France's Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot told the French National Assembly that Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur for the Palestinian territories, is, quote, targeting Israel as a people and as a nation. He's called for her resignation and said he'd be formally requesting her removal at the next session for the UN Human Rights Council. So how did this all begin? Well, the French Foreign Minister's decision came after a French MP by the name of Caroline Yadin demanded an explanation from him about comments that Albanese made at a conference recently in Qatar that she regarded as anti-Semitic. Now, Yadin alleged that the UN Special Rapporteur had called Israel the common enemy of humanity, and she took to X to post this photo of Francesca Albanese with that quote, with the caption that these anti-Semitic remarks made in Qatar are utterly indefensible. Now, this, coupled with pressure from other MPs in her party, is what triggered this response from France to formally push for the resignation of Francesca Albanese.
So talk us through exactly what Francesca Albanese is well, accused of saying at this conference, and give us the context as well, because that's very important, isn't it?
Well, the short version is that she doesn't say the phrase that she is accused of saying. Now, we saw there the accusation. She's accused of calling Israel the common enemy of humanity at a roundtable discussion in Qatar last Saturday, organised by Qatari media outlet Al Jazeera. Now, also present at this conference were other specialists and Middle Eastern politicians, including the Iranian foreign minister and a Hamas leader. Now, Albanese spoke by video conference, and she only spoke for about 4 minutes at the event. And to defend herself, she took to X to post the entirety of her speech online. And she posted this to that French MP, Caroline Yada, saying that it seems that checking the source was deemed unnecessary. Now, we took the liberty of having a look at the controversial passage in question. Now, there's no evidence of the quote that she has been accused of saying by that French MP, but let's go through it together. Now, she starts by saying that in the fact, instead of stopping Israel, most of the world has armed, given it political shelter, economic and financial support. She also goes on to say that most of the media in the Western world has been amplifying what she calls pro-apartheid genocidal narrative. She also says that international law has been stabbed in the heart and the global community has never before seen the challenges that we face. But this is the part in question that is causing the controversy. Now, she says here, we who do not control large amounts of financial capitals, algorithms and weapons, we now see that we as a humanity have a common enemy. So she does use the phrase common enemy. But if you compare it to what she's being accused of saying, that Israel is the common enemy of humanity, that is not what she said at this speech.
So, Francesca Albanese actually spoke to us here at France 24, and she clarified, Vedeka, didn't she? She actually clarified her wording.
Yes, we had Francesca Albanese with us here for an interview on our tete-a-tete programme hosted by Mark Palman, and she defended her position and clarified what she was saying there. Now, she called France's statement a manipulation of her words. She says that she was referring to the system is the common enemy of humanity, not Israel. But I think it's better to listen directly to the UN Special Rapporteur herself about what she meant.
Because I participated remotely, as you can see from the video, and I encourage everyone to watch and to listen to what I said. And I challenge everyone to find what I'm accused of saying, that Israel is the enemy of the humanity. I've never said that. I've said something very different, but of course it's been manipulated so as to corroborate the defamation against me. What I've said is very different, and I was in a panel not with Hamas leaders. This is yet again another distortion. I was invited by Al Jazeera to speak at a panel composed of jurists, including former prosecutors of the ICC, Fatou Bensouda, and I was honored to be among them, frankly. And what I said was, of course, commenting on the genocide and blaming not just Israel, but the system. It's the system that has allowed, that has armed the genocide, that has sheltered genocide from accountability.
Now, I just want to add here that despite Francesca Albanese clarifying her position, as we heard to us, the French Foreign Ministry is standing by its position that she must resign. The French Foreign Minister said her comments add to what he called a long list of scandalous positions. He accused her of justifying the attacks of 7th October in Israel, and he accused her of comparing Israel to the Third Reich. So France is standing by that position of her to resign. And Germany, just today, Thursday, has also joined France in that stance, also calling for her removal as UN Special Rapporteur.
Georgia was long seen as one of the most pro-Western states in the former Soviet Union. But relations have soured amid mass protests against the ruling pro-Russian Georgian Dream Party. Georgia said Tuesday it was patiently waiting for a reset in U.S. ties as U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance visited neighbors Armenia and Azerbaijan, but skipped Tbilisi, once Washington's closest regional ally. Relations between Georgia and the U.S. have sharply deteriorated over the past 2 years, with U.S. officials accusing the ruling Georgian Dream Party's government of democratic backsliding and drifting closer to Russia. Washington has suspended a strategic partnership agreement with Tbilisi and imposed sanctions on senior officials linked to the ruling party. Prime Minister Irakli Kobakidze said Tbilisi remained open to restoring the relationship, despite being left off the
Bonjour à toutes et à tous et bienvenue dans l'émission. Aujourd'hui, j'ai le plaisir de recevoir pour 12 minutes la ministre française de l'Armée et des anciens combattants, Catherine Vautrin, pour justement décrypter la défense et la sécurité en Europe. Une Europe qui se trouve de plus en plus prise en étau entre une Russie agressive et des États-Unis imprévisibles. Madame la ministre, merci d'être avec nous aujourd'hui.
Bonjour.
Alors commençons par la situation en Ukraine. Êtes-vous convaincu que les négociations menées sous l'égide des États-Unis aboutiront à un accord de paix définitif?
Alors déjà, je vais peut-être vous parler de la situation en Ukraine parce que j'étais samedi Il y a donc 5 jours, j'étais en Ukraine à l'invitation de mon collègue, le nouveau ministre Mikhail Fedorov. Et avec lui, je suis allée sur une base à l'extérieur de Kiev. J'ai rencontré le président Zelensky. J'ai beaucoup écouté également.
The agreement comes ahead of Trump's planned visit to China in April and suggests deepening economic ties between the U.S. and Taiwan. The Trump administration reached a trade deal with Taiwan on Thursday, with Taiwan agreeing to remove or reduce 99% of its tariff barriers, the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative said. The agreement comes as the U.S. remains reliant on Taiwan for its production of computer chips, the exporting of which contributed to a trade imbalance of nearly $127 billion during the first 11 months of 2025, according to the Census Bureau. Taiwan's exports to the U.S. will be taxed at a 15% rate or the U.S. government's most favored nation rate, the USTR's office said. The 15% rate is the same as that levied on other U.S. trading partners in the Asia-Pacific region, such as Japan. United States Army Yuma Proving Ground is conducting live fire tests of the next-generation rocket-assisted projectile, a new 155mm artillery round designed to replace the legacy M549A1 and extend the range of current howitzer systems. According to officials at YPG, the next-generation rocket-assisted projectile, or NGRAP, is intended to dramatically increase the and #8230. This is Bruce Whitfield's Business Week, a weekly News 24 podcast that respects your time and Jeffrey Epstein used a former Russian official with links to Moscow's FSB intelligence services to collect information on a woman he claimed was attempting to blackmail his business associates, according to documents released by the U.S. Department of Justice. UK charity warns against excessive academic pressure and suggests reducing the number of high-stakes tests. Exam stress at age 15 can increase the risk of depression and self-harm into early adulthood, research suggests. Academic pressure is known to have a detrimental impact on mood and overall well-being, but until now few studies had examined the long-term effects on mental health. Researchers at University College London examined data from nearly 5,000 young people born in 1991 and 1992 taking part in a wider ongoing study of children. Academic pressure was assessed at the age of 15 through questionnaires on their school experiences, while mental health was tracked regularly from 16 to 22 and self-harm until they were 24.
You are watching Middle East Matters here on France 24. Today, shocking statistics from Israel. One Arab citizen of the country killed every 36 hours on average this last year, 2025. Now, in the latest news, just today, 5 people shot in less than 24 hours. The police commissioner of Israel, Daniel Levy, describing the situation as a national emergency. Coming up in this programme, we look at why crime rates are soaring within Israel's Palestinian communities. Where does the blame lie? And what now can be done? Well, our reporter, Claire de Hamel, travelled to Nazareth, which is home to a sizable Palestinian Arab population, to find out more about the organised crime and the gang violence which is plaguing the communities there. Here's her report.
Arab staff have gone on strike at hospitals across Israel.
To anyone who wants to participate, we're striking for half an hour in front of the hospital because of the murders and violence. If you want, you can join us. We are against violence and against murder. We are medical teams here, and every day we give our all to save lives. Meanwhile, they are taking lives.
Demonstrations like this have taken place at hospitals across the country. It's due to the number of victims of organised crime reaching a record high in 2025. 252 Palestinian citizens of Israel were killed last year. A poster on the wall of this restaurant honours the memory of 27-year-old Ahmed. His uncle says he was threatened by gangs.
They had asked his family to pay 5 million shekels. Naturally, the response to these people was to say no, of course not. So some men entered his office and shot him. He spent 18 days between life and death in the hospital. Then on June 24th, God took his soul and he passed away.
Ahmad's murder was never solved by police. Nizar says that the authorities deliberately neglect Israel's Arab population. He's gone out protesting alongside Israelis who also oppose the government.
This country is for two peoples. We shouldn't each live at the mercy of the other, everyone for themselves. The country of Israel calls on Arabs and Jews to live together.
We know that it's possible to stop organized crime. I grew up in an area where there was a lot of organized crime, Jewish organized crime. It was put under control because people wanted it to be put under control. They stopped it. They moved the people. They put them in jail.
These bereaved families and their supporters say that only awareness at a national level will help the fight against gang violence.
Well, to keep talking about this story on the programme, I'm very pleased to welcome live now Ibrahim Abu Ahmed. He's a peace and political activist and himself a Palestinian citizen of Israel. Hello to you and thanks for speaking to us today on France 24.
Thank you so much for having me and for putting our important case to the international community to see.
Well, look, we are pleased to talk to you about this. As I say, this is a very, important topical story. We're seeing people killed just within the last 24 hours. Can you give us a sense as to who's behind this latest wave? What is this? Gang violence, organised crime, and who's being targeted?
So what's been happening, and it's not something that's been happening only in the last year, it's something that's been on the rise for the last 10 to 15 years. It is not something new, and the number of murder cases every year have only increased. And this has been predominantly by gangs and crime and organized crime that is taking control over our communities. We're talking about roughly 1% of our population, of our community, that is over 2 million people. Only 1% is terrorizing the entire community, seeking protection money from businesses all across the country, as well as taking control over even threatening municipalities and trying to take budgets and taking control over budgets that are allocated for the local community, for cities to develop, but they're being taken control by the organized crime. It's over 80% of murder cases among Palestinian citizens in Israel are conducted by the organized crime, and the vast majority is also unsolved.
Look, and as you say, rates of violence within the Palestinian community have been high for a long time, but last year they hit new unprecedented levels. How do you explain that, why we're seeing this rise in violence now? I mean, how much blame do you put, for example, on this particular government of Benjamin Netanyahu?
Listen, I mean, right before this government took office in 2023, in the year 2022, we saw for the first time in the last 10 years a drop in the number of murders after the previous government have allocated a special program called the Safe Track program that has actually reduced the number of murder cases from 121 in the year before to 106. Now, I know it's a very small margin, but every soul is a precious one. And that program was supposed to be a long-term one. But as soon as this new government took office with the so-called Minister of National Security, then he dismissed this program entirely and dictated that he will be the new boss in town. But we saw that the crime is only increasing and that he doesn't really care about what's happening in the Arab community. Listen, I only heard him just recently on Sunday speaking to an interview, and he said, we want to take care of the crime. 3 years after being in office, you're still using the terminology of this is something that we want to do. It's something that you should be already doing for the past 3 years. And that small slip of mouth indicates the kind of attitude he has towards crime in our community. It's not something on his top of his agenda. It's only a populist statements for his personal base, rather than being a real minister that will take charge and look for real programs. We haven't seen a real single program to reduce the crime, except for saying only for the Jewish community, you are allowed to take a license for weapons and to be safe. Of course, if you're an Arab citizen, you're not going to be able to take a license for a gun to protect yourself or your family, but he's focused his efforts on bringing ammunition and guns to the Jewish community to protect themselves, leaving the Arab community completely vulnerable from Palestinian citizens of Israel. But I also want to include other members who are Arab citizens, like the Druze community that is also sitting under threat, and for its predominantly is not part of the Palestinian people as a peoplehood for the most part. They're Israeli citizens. You know, some of the allocations against us is about enforcements of the police and things like that, but we see it also happening to the Druze community that has been
When you look at Lebanon, how optimistic are you in seeing Hezbollah fully de-armed and disbanded as the Trump administration has demanded?
I'm really probably more optimistic than most people because I'm very close to it. I'm in the middle of dealing with pieces of that. And I can see that this could happen. Now, is it fragile? You bet it is. The big challenge is ramping up the capacity of the Lebanese armed forces, the LAF, and ramping down the power and influence of Hezbollah. If Iran and its regime were to collapse, then that means that the funnel of money and weaponry to Hezbollah collapses with it. It would accelerate the capacity of Lebanon to free itself, get out from under the shackles of this hideous snake of Hezbollah. That would be a wonderful thing. It would help move Lebanon forward. And I think that it's so important for people from the outside to look and say, the Lebanese really deserve better. They're beautiful people. They want to be free. They want their kids to grow up with a sense of security and safety. Israel does not want to take anything in the terms of real estate in southern Lebanon. They don't want it. They just want to protect themselves. So the faster that we can get to that place where Hezbollah isn't threatening Israelis on the north, Israel is able to pull back and just simply defend its own border, and that's it. And Lebanon will have freedom, freedom of movement, freedom of future that they don't have as long as Hamas is there to take its ugly head and stick it into the life of the Lebanese people.
The agreement comes ahead of Trump's planned visit to China in April and suggests deepening economic ties between the U.S. and Taiwan. The Trump administration reached a trade deal with Taiwan on Thursday, with Taiwan agreeing to remove or reduce 99% of its tariff barriers, the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative said. The agreement comes as the U.S. remains reliant on Taiwan for its production of XPM's think tank urges more drilling and fewer renewables, ignoring evidence that clean energy is cheaper and better for bills. A think tank
That's sparking widespread.
Now we're going to
Well, let's get more now. We can speak to William Alberg, who is former director of NATO's Arms Control, Disarmament and Weapons of Mass Destruction Non-Proliferation Center. He joins us from Berlin. William, great pleasure having you on the program, as always. Let's just talk, first of all, about those discussions between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump yesterday at the White House. Why do you think Netanyahu took this step of flying over there to talk to the president? What do you think he was trying to persuade him to do?
I think he was probably trying to persuade the United States to maintain maximum pressure and possibly to even go ahead and strike Iran. You'll recall that before the June strikes that Israel started in Iran, there had been some interesting negotiations between the US and Iran and Oman that looked like they were really making progress towards some kind of deal. And it looked like Netanyahu used the International Atomic Energy Agency Board of Governors' decision in June that Iran was likely, or that they couldn't rule out that Iran was moving towards nuclear weapon to strike, also disrupting the U.S. negotiations. And then that was so successful that the U.S. continued on with those military strikes. So I think with the fear that Iran and the United States might come to an agreement, Netanyahu would much rather further military action against Iran.
Right. I mean, at the moment, just listening to what the president's been saying and writing on social media, dialogue seems to be the preferred course of action. And yet, at the same time, as you've been saying and others have been telling us, Israeli officials urging him not to trust Iran, not to believe its promises. I mean, do you think a deal will be reached? And do you think it would be advisable for President Trump to try to reach one?
It's so difficult to predict. Iran's negotiating strategy to date has just been an appalling failure. I mean, brinksmanship, delay, and this really doesn't work with Trump. Trump would rather get some kind of rhetorical agreement and then work out the details later. Instead, Iran wants to front load all the details and delay and obfuscate. And it's just been a recipe for disaster so far. So you really can't tell. But on the other hand, striking a couple of nuclear facilities is one thing. Overthrow of the Iranian government or fundamentally destroying all of their nuclear capabilities, that's a much longer military campaign. I'm sure the U.S. would rather avoid that. But with one aircraft carrier in the region, the USS Lincoln, and now Trump threatening to send another aircraft carrier, which would likely be the George H.W. Bush, which right now is in Virginia. It would take around 10, maybe 14 days to get into the region. Plus with the U.S. global reach with its heavy bombers, it's a real threat. And that's, unfortunately, that's the right negotiating strategy, putting Iran under pressure before you go into negotiations. The optics of Israel visiting Washington can't only but help put pressure on Iran to come to some deal. But they have to just stop this obfuscation and delay, and everything takes 3 weeks, and they come to some minor decision. They have to go back to Tehran. That's just not going to work at this point. It doesn't work with Donald Trump. And so there's a real risk of strikes coming up.
Right. So it sounds to me like you think perhaps Iran is, to some extent, playing games here and trying to buy a bit of time.
That's true. I mean, you have to remember, before the strikes, one of the reasons the International Atomic Energy Agency Board of Governors judged that they could no longer prove that Iran wasn't going for a bomb. They had accelerated their enrichment of 60% enriched HEU. And really, anything past 20%, and you are so close to having a bomb. And we're talking about now, at the last measure, 440.9 kilograms. That's enough for more than a dozen nuclear weapons within weeks if they were able to complete enrichment and turn that into a useful nuclear device. So Iran was really playing a dangerous game before the bombing. And now we don't know where the uranium is. Iran has blocked IAEA inspections to be able to locate and account for all the material. So it's a bad situation. And really, I think Iran should just come to a deal, let the details be worked out between two sides, but agree. And that's why I think the president of Iran, I think it was today, said that he would allow some sort of IAEA verification. I think that may be a sign that they're trying to put some concessions on the table. But ultimately, they still have to agree to the venue and the date for talks. I have some hope. And again, watching the U.S. ramp up the pressure, Iran making some concessions as we go into this, maybe they can come to a deal. There really is a deal space if the sides want it.
So what you're saying is that, and what we've been reading is that Iran has got these stockpiles of enriched uranium, and they've got enough of it to build a device. Who knows? I mean, could they have perhaps already built one? In which case, isn't the discussion of how to prevent an Iranian nuclear program slightly futile at this stage?
Well, I don't think they have a viable device. The problem is, if they actually crossed that threshold and built one nuclear weapon, their window of vulnerability is massive, because they would have to build the weapon in secret. They'd have to find a delivery system. Now, they have plenty of missiles that can deliver that, but they have to mount it. And then what are they going to do? Launch one nuclear weapon or threaten to launch one nuclear weapon? That would invite the U.S., with a lot of global support, by the way, to bomb the heck out of Iranian facilities and destroy any possibility of anything like that happening, and even bring about the specter of regime change. If they cross that threshold, that actually opens up a window of opportunity. If they were really going to proliferate, if they were really going to build nuclear weapons, they would need time and space to be able to build a number of them so that they could declare that they had a viable arsenal. So I do honestly think that there is some negotiation.
Yo le dije que sí, que les quería entrar a ese grupo, porque yo me sentía muy sola, tenía muchos problemas familiares y pues que yo quería tomar esa decisión para, no sé, para librarme, bueno, supuestamente librarme de los problemas. En una parte como que me llamaba mucho la atención, pero en otra parte yo decía, pero no, porque se suponía que la guerrilla y todos los grupos armados se crearon principalmente para defender el territorio, pero después, no sé, eso se fue perdiendo y ahora a uno le da tristeza ver cómo matan hasta la propia familia de ellos mismos. Ahora yo pienso las cosas con más claridad. Yo digo, pues, gracias a Dios no me fui a esos grupos.
Hind Rajab in Gaza and Virginia Giuffre, who survived Epstein Island, are both, in very different ways, but they are both victims of that transnational oligarchy which exploits human life, either very directly for profit or for gratification and entertainment. And people in Gaza are at the sharp end of an economic system that seeks to benefit big tech, real estate, and so on. The victims on Epstein Island were used as zoo animals or for sexual gratification or for entertainment by the beneficiaries of that system of profit making and plunder and violence in Gaza.
German U-boats enjoyed a formidable reputation during the Second World War. Winston Churchill wrote after the war that the only thing that really scared me was the U-boat peril. But despite causing quite a lot of terror, German U-boats in the early war operated with significant handicaps that had nothing to do with the Allies. The series of technological problems that were referred to as the torpedo crisis might have changed the very course of the war, because they handicapped German U-boats during a critical point in the war and gave the Allies much-needed time to develop their anti-submarine tactics. It's history that deserves to be remembered. Given how much submarine warfare in the 20th century is now associated with the Germans, it might surprise you to learn that the German Navy was the last major navy to adopt the submarine. Alfred von Tirpitz, who led Germany's effort to build a fleet to rival the British Royal Navy, focused on battleships and only commissioned a submarine in late 1906, 5 years after the Royal Navy had launched its first submarines. By the outbreak of World War I, Germany had significantly fewer submarines in service than the UK did. But the war changed all of that. The German submarine fleet grew enormously during the war, eventually reaching as many as 140 submarines, which proved to be technologically superior to Allied subs and incredibly effective at sinking Allied shipping. Ultimately, submarines would become the defining vessel of the World War I naval war as surface fleets languished in port. The interwar period saw significant improvement in U-boat technology. Despite being officially barred from building submarines, Krupp continued to build subs for other countries through a Dutch dummy company. In response to more outrageous breaches of the Treaty of Versailles, the Anglo-German Naval Agreement was signed between the UK and Germany, which loosened restrictions and allowed for about 24,000 tons of U-boats. By 1939, Germany had chosen to ignore the agreements altogether, launching Plan Z, which called for 200,000 tons of U-boats. Torpedo technology also improved dramatically in the interwar period. During World War I, most torpedoes used contact or impact pistols to detonate. Torpedoes used whiskers, mechanical levers, which would release a firing pin once they actually hit the enemy ship. This technology had serious drawbacks. It meant that torpedoes had to be fired at shallow depths, and that any holes made in the enemy ship would be close to the waterline. They also meant much of the explosion could dissipate into the air, or a glancing blow could mean the torpedo failed to detonate at all. As early as 1917, German torpedoes were using magnetic pistols, which worked by detecting a magnetic field to trigger the firing pin. The British discovered examples of the new technology in 1918, but found the devices to be unreliable. Essentially, magnetic pistols work by calibrating a sensor to a local magnetic field, which would then be disrupted when a large metal object got near. The technology was also used in late World War I magnetic mines. The advantage of magnetic pistols was that the torpedoes could be fired at greater depths, allowing the torpedo to avoid armored torpedo belts and detonate directly beneath the ship. Anthony Newpower, in his book Iron Men and Tin Fish, describes the effect of these torpedoes. The blast creates a gigantic air bubble capable of lifting the ship out of the water. At the apex of the bubble's upward travel, the bow and stern flexed towards the sea, creating an arch in the otherwise rigid keel. The bubble then quickly collapsed, leaving a void into which the unfortunate victims now fell. This action created the opposite effect on the keel, with the bow and stern now flexing upwards. There were practical reasons that these technologies weren't as effective as that implies, however. The most glaring issue was that you had to account for variations in the Earth's magnetic field, meaning settings for the torpedoes changed depending on latitude. A major problem for the Germans was that they were officially banned from testing torpedoes under the Treaty of Versailles, and testing them thoroughly was an incredibly expensive process that so few tests were run. Though the Germans were not allowed to manufacture new torpedoes, they got around that by simply updating
The deal commits Taiwan to significantly boost purchases of U.S. goods from 2025 through 2029. Containers and equipment sit at the port of Keelung, Taiwan, on August 7, 2025. Photo: Reuters / Wang. Washington. Trump administration officials signed a final reciprocal trade agreement that confirmed a 15% U.S. tariff rate for imports from Taiwan, while committing Taiwan to a schedule for eliminating or lowering tariffs on nearly all U.S. goods. The document released by the U.S. Trade Representative's Office on Thursday, February 12th, also commits Taiwan to significantly boost purchases of U.S. goods from 2025 through 2029, including $44 U.S. For billion of liquefied natural gas and crude oil, $15 U.S. $2 billion of civil aircraft and engines, $25 U.S. $2 billion of power grid equipment and generators, marine and steelmaking equipment. The Times of Israel is live blogging Friday's events as they happen. Police launch another murder investigation after a woman is shot to death in the northern city of Tamra, the sixth Arab-Israeli homicide victim in the past day. A police statement says the woman, in her 50s, was critically wounded and later pronounced dead after being taken to a local hospital. Police add that they are looking into a motive for the shooting, which they describe as crime-related. National Security Minister U.S. President Donald Trump said Thursday that President Isaac Herzog should be ashamed of himself for not granting a pardon to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who is standing trial for alleged fraud, bribery, and breach of trust. Trump has been calling for Netanyahu to be pardoned since June 2025, but Monday was the first time he attacked Herzog for not granting one to the premier. The comments came a day after Trump met Netanyahu in the White House, leading to speculation that the Israeli premier raised the issue during their sit-down. Asked by reporters at the White House whether Netanyahu is responsible for the security failures that allowed Hamas's October 7, 2023, attack to unfold, Trump responded, "I guess everybody's responsible," before noting that it was a sneak attack that nobody else would have seen coming. He went on to again hail Netanyahu as a very good wartime prime minister, touting their joint successes against Iran before turning his aim to Herzog. "You have a president who refused to give him a pardon. He should be ashamed of himself," Trump said. The primary power he's got is to give pardons, and he's not. He said he's given it 5 different times, but he doesn't want to do it because, "I guess he loses his power," Trump said, without elaborating. "I think the people of Israel should really shame him." This is Bruce Whitfield's Business Week, a weekly News 24 podcast that respects your time and intelligence. Amid reported heavy Russian strikes across Ukraine on Thursday, UN Human Rights Chief Volker Turk has condemned the continual bombardment the country's people are facing. His reaction followed overnight attacks on energy infrastructure in Kyiv, Dnipro, and the key port city of Odessa. Nearly 8,800 multi-story buildings in Kyiv, Kharkiv, and Odessa are without heating. In Kharkiv, temperatures are forecast to drop to -10 degrees Celsius or 14 degrees Fahrenheit on Thursday evening, said Victoria Andrievska from the UN Aid Coordination Office, OCHA. Without heating or electricity, homes will turn freezing, basic services will stop. For example, the lifts will stop working, and people, especially older residents and families with children, will struggle to stay warm and safe, she said. In his statement, the UN human rights chief emphasized the lasting impact of large-scale attacks by Russia on Ukrainian energy infrastructure, which he stressed are prohibited under international law. Millions of households struggle with only a few hours of electricity each day, Mr. Turk said, noting that unheated schools have been forced to shut and medical care has been impacted too. International efforts to end the war in Ukraine continue, meanwhile, with Moscow announcing on Thursday that it expected the next round of talks to take
to the programme. Our top story this hour: the number of children recruited to be soldiers in Haiti has tripled in the past year. This according to research just published today by UNICEF, the UN Children's Agency. The children are often forced to join gangs, which now control about 90% of the Haitian capital, Port-au-Prince. Well, with me to talk about this is Antoine Ghazali. He's a child protection specialist at UNICEF Haiti. Hello to you and thanks for speaking to us.
Hello, thank you.
So tell us then, how is it that this many children have ended up becoming recruited by gangs? Who's recruiting them?
So the reality, what we are showcasing, only even the 200% increase of children being recruited is only a small portion of what we have been documenting as grave violation against children for the past couple of years. This number is also being increased on a yearly basis due to the fact that the political and instability and also the war is dragging Haiti into additional sorrow, which is, you can see now right now in the pictures, this is the harsh reality that Haiti is leading, with over 90% of the capital being controlled by the gangs and more than 1.4 million children and population being displaced. Out of them, half of them are children. This number is only going to be increasing as the poverty is also on the rise. As UNICEF, we are working to be able to document those grave violations against children, and we are noticing that poverty is one of the main cause that is pushing children to be recruited by the gangs, unfortunately.
Yeah, and as you say, that the stats are shocking. A 200% jump in the number of children who are being forced now to join gangs. And for those children, obviously, look, there are physical dangers of being part of gangs. But I can imagine as well, it's psychologically hugely damaging for these children too.
Exactly. We have been noticing throughout our programs additional also traumas that children are facing, especially boys and girls. As you know, boys are being used as sometimes as spies and also as couriers for those gangs, but also girls are being used as sexual slaves. So this situation has been having a huge toll on children's psychosocial status, and we are trying too hard as UNICEF and our partners to ensure that psychosocial support is being provided for those children, but also for their caregivers that are also facing these intensive, let's put it in this way, price due to this fact of political instability and raging war. And we need also to notice that in the upcoming season, in the upcoming period of time, we'll be having also deployment of the gang suppression force. And this is all also causing the gangs to create additional tension in the city.
Yeah, look, let's talk about the life of children in Haiti, if we can, just beyond the gangs, even though obviously that is a really important part of this story and your work with UNICEF. There's about 1.2 million children under the age of 5 in Haiti who face food insecurity. Just spell out to us what that means. What does life look like for a child in that position?
In addition to the 1.42 million that are children that are under this case of facing severe malnutrition, you also need to add that there's a huge closure of schools within the capital and also in the country. So children are not being able even to access the basic services that are, of course, the medical part of it, but also accessing the school system. So part of what we are trying to see is as UNICEF, we are trying to work around the clock to be able to ensure at least minimum packages of services, including health and nutrition, and even basic packages of education and formal and non-formal education for children living in Port-au-Prince, in their host community, but also in IDP sites. And you need to know that the number that I mentioned before, the 1.4 million IDPs are internally displaced people. So there are children and parents forced to leave their homes due to the gang violence.
And just a final question for you, Antoine. I'm sure UNICEF is doing the best that it can for these children you're talking about in Haiti, but given that 90% of the capital, an extraordinary statistic, is controlled by these gangs, I mean, how much access do you actually have to help the children here who clearly are in significant need?
So part of the work we are doing is actually working also on the prevention of this community violence, and also working with local actors that are working inside those controlled zones. So we rely heavily on the local actors and NGOs that are working in the controlled areas. And these are our these are the ones who are providing the main access to those children. And they are the ones who are providing the access to the services.
All right, Antoine Ghazali, really good to speak to you today about the situation facing children in Haiti. Thanks very much.
You're watching Al Arabiya English. I'm Melinda Nusafora, and we're pleased to have a special interview to bring you with Wael Al-Sahan, the Chief Communications and Support Services Officer for Saudi Arabian Military Industries. Thank you so much for joining Al Arabiya English.
Thank you, Melinda, and it's a pleasure to be with Al Arabiya English. Welcome to SAMI.
Thank you so much. SAMI is showcasing more than 60 national products and capabilities here at the World Defence Show. So talk us through how you would assess SAMI's progress and development.
Amazing. First, just a small correction, 61 national capability and a product that we're showcasing. I'm very happy to be standing here on SAMI Pavilion in the third participation as a national strategic champion partner.
Truth or Fate brings us Vedika Bahal here in the studio. Vedika, as always, great to see you. France calling for the resignation of Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur for the Palestinian territories, over anti-Semitic comments that she allegedly made targeting Israel. So tell us, what's the story behind this?
Well, Mark, on Wednesday, France's Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot told the French National Assembly that Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur for the Palestinian territories, is, quote, targeting Israel as a people and as a nation. He's called for her resignation and said he'd be formally requesting her removal at the next session for the UN Human Rights Council. So how did this all begin? Well, the French Foreign Minister's decision came after a French MP by the name of Caroline Yadin demanded an explanation from him about comments that Albanese made at a conference recently in Qatar that she regarded as anti-Semitic. Now, Yadin alleged that the UN Special Rapporteur had called Israel the common enemy of humanity. And she took to X to post this photo of Francesca Albanese with that quote, with the caption that these anti-Semitic remarks made in Qatar are utterly indefensible. Now, this, coupled with pressure from other MPs in her party, is what triggered this response from France to formally push for the resignation of Francesca Albanese.
So talk us through exactly what Francesca Albanese is accused of saying at this conference, and give us the context as well, because that's very important, isn't it?
Well, the short version is that she doesn't say the phrase that she is accused of saying. Now, we saw there the accusation. She's accused of calling Israel the common enemy of humanity at a roundtable discussion in Qatar last Saturday, organised by Qatari media outlet Al Jazeera. Now, also present at this conference were other specialists and Middle Eastern politicians, including the Iranian foreign minister and a Hamas leader. Now, Albanese spoke by video conference, and she only spoke for about 4 minutes at the event. And to defend herself, she took to X to post the entirety of her speech online. And she posted this to that French MP, Caroline Yada, saying that it seems that checking the source was deemed unnecessary. Now, we took the liberty of having a look at the controversial passage in question. Now, there's no evidence of the quote that she has been accused of saying by that French MP, but let's go through it together. Now, she starts by saying that in the fact, instead of stopping Israel, most of the world has armed, given it political shelter, economic and financial support. She also goes on to say that most of the media in the Western world has been amplifying what she calls pro-apartheid genocidal narrative. She also says that international law has been stabbed in the heart, and the global community has never before seen the challenges that we face. But this is the part in question that is causing the controversy. Now, she says here, we who do not control large amounts of financial capitals, algorithms and weapons, we now see that we as a humanity have a common enemy. So she does use the phrase common enemy, but if you compare it to what she's being accused of saying, that Israel is the common enemy of humanity, that is not what she said at the speech.
So Francesca Albanese actually spoke to us here at France 24. And she clarified, Vedika, didn't she? She actually clarified her wording.
Yes, we had Francesca Albanese with us here for an interview on our tete-a-tete programme hosted by Mark Palman, and she defended her position and clarified what she was saying there. Now, she called France's statement a manipulation of her words. She says that she was referring to the system is the common enemy of humanity, not Israel. But I think it's better to listen directly to the UN Special Rapporteur herself about what she meant.
Because I participated remotely, as you can see from the video, and I encourage everyone to watch and to listen to what I said. And I challenge everyone to find what I'm accused of saying, that Israel is the enemy of the humanity. I've never said that.
Hello and welcome back to our special coverage here on Al Arabiya English. I'm Melinda Nusafora. We have a special interview for you coming from the World Defence Show here in Riyadh. Well, when you walk into these vast expo halls, one of the first things that may strike you is the sheer number of Turkish flagged companies on display, and chief amongst them is Aselsan. We are pleased to welcome the CEO and president of Aselsan, now one of Europe's most valuable defence firms, Ahmet Akiol. Thanks for being with us, sir.
Thank you so much for visiting us. Welcome to Aselsan booth in World Defence Show.
Thank you so much. One of the flagship accomplishments of Aselsan, and one of the things that many people here are talking about, is the Steel Dome, the first Turkish-made air defence system. Talk me through why it's so unique and why it's capturing so much attention.
So thank you so much. First of all, we started this project for about 2-3 years back due to the developments in the battlefield and the change in the technological wise, because now threats are more faster, harder to detect, harder to intercept, and also AI is coming for everywhere and all threats are connected. So also there are some developments in the technological wise to make some platforms stealth, and also there are many cheaper drones and everything are now very common in all around the world. So due to these developments, in order to overcome these threats, we analyze inside Aselsan with many supercomputers, and we work with the military guys that only way to overcome these threats is integrated, layered air defense systems. Then we started this project. In the past, we have been working on the air defense systems. There were many separate systems delivered to battlefield. There were many radars delivered to battlefield, communication systems and electronic warfare systems. Now, this is fully integrated. The unique part of Steel Dome is electronic warfare is also integrated to this system. There are 4 layers and radars with the multi-bands, and also many different interceptors, including gun-based, missile-based, and soft gear and hard gear. Now there is a network, there is an AI-based command and control systems managing this Steel Dome, and in Turkey many units are delivered. At the same time, we are now in the serial phase, but with the serial production, we are trying to add new features, new capabilities for
a major demolition being carried out here in the occupied West Bank. This time, it's not the Israeli army, but Israeli settlers. This area that we are in is Area C, where Israel does not allow Palestinians or give them permits to build or expand on the existing structures. Some of the homes that were demolished did not have any demolition notices, and Palestinians say it was settlers who implemented whatever decision they wanted on their own with the protection of Israeli soldiers.
This demolition is not ordered by a court. We have an injunction order that freezes any demolition, but the settlers don't care. They also stole property, including my tractor.
Everywhere we look, there's another demolition. People here say they don't know what triggered the Israeli settler attack with a bulldozer, but it's definitely a new phase. Israeli settlers demolishing homes and not just attacking Palestinians in their houses. Already, settler attacks, according to the UN, have managed to displace hundreds of Palestinians just since the beginning of this year. They say this is part of a policy where settlers have full impunity to act wherever they are, wherever they want to, and attack Palestinians in order to replace them and kick them out of their homes. This comes just a few days after the Israeli government has decided a new set of decisions that would allow settlers to move into Palestinian areas, not just in Area C, but also in Area A and Area B as well. Palestinians say that it's getting harder and harder to live in the occupied West Bank with every single day.
U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM, has facilitated the transfer of around 5,000 Islamic State detainees from Syria to Iraq, according to Iraqi media reports on February 11th. The U.S. began the mission to transfer up to 7,000 detainees from Syria to Iraq on January 21st, according to CENTCOM. Iraqi Justice Minister Khaled Shwani predicted that the transfer will be completed by February 12th. The movement of Islamic State members to Iraq comes as Iraqi authorities have warned about the jihadist group's threats in the Anbar and Nineveh provinces along the border with Syria. The fate of thousands of Islamic State detainees in Syria became a concern in January during clashes between the Syrian government and the Syrian Democratic Forces, SDF. Thousands of adult male detainees and more than 20,000 detained women and children have been held in Syria since the Islamic State was largely defeated in Syria in 2019. The jihadist group's members have been held in 24 facilities in Syria, including 2 large camps. After 3 decades of its mandate to protect children caught up in war, the UN's top advocate on the issue is determined to remind the world that prevention and protection go hand in hand. In an exclusive interview with UN News, Special Representative for Children and Armed Conflict, Vanessa Fraser, reflected on the alarming rise in grave violations against children and the urgent need to safeguard their future. The recruitment and use of children is still one of the most widespread and devastating violations we face. In 2024 alone, over 7,400 children were recruited or used by armed forces and armed groups, and those are only the verified cases, MS. Fraser told us just ahead of Thursday's International Day against the use of child soldiers. Over the last 30 years, we have separated over 220,000 children from armed gangs, she emphasized. Her office monitors approximately 26 conflict situations around the world, and the numbers tell a grim story. The violations are most prevalent in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Nigeria, Somalia, Syria, and Myanmar, MS. Fraser explained. But we're also seeing worrying trends in Sudan, where children are specifically targeted because they are seen as useful, as border guards, as workers, even as fighters.
yo dije que sí, que les quería entrar a eso.
Tehran, February. 12 MNA. Indonesian Foreign Minister He Sugiono has congratulated his Iranian counterpart and the government and people of Iran on the 47th anniversary of the victory of the Islamic Revolution. In a congratulatory message to Iranian Foreign Minister Said Abbas Araghchi, Indonesian Foreign Minister He Sugiono offered his country's congratulation to the people and government of Iran on the 47th anniversary of the victory of the Islamic Revolution. On this occasion, we also commemorate the 76th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between Indonesia and Iran.
Hello and welcome to this special interview here on Al Arabiya English, coming to you from the World Defence Show in Riyadh. I'm Melinda Nusafora. We have the pleasure of being joined by one of the world's largest aerospace Firms, VP of International Business Development at Boeing Defence, Vince Logston. Thanks so much for being here.
Good to be here.
Vince, Saudi Arabia, you have said, is one of Boeing's largest partners outside of the US. Talk me through why this region is important for Boeing's future.
Well, Saudi Arabia, in general, is a central point for Boeing's presence here in the Middle East. And we see Saudi Arabia as a major partner in helping us to define the future of aerospace.
There's a big push, not just for strategic partnerships, but for local investment in Saudi Arabia. You've said that you're not interested just in selling platforms, you're here to be strategic partners. So elaborate on that. What does that mean, and how does that differ from how you may operate in other countries?
Sure. Well, there's a lot of capability here in the kingdom, and very capable country. So what we want to be is a strategic partner across the board, and that's from every aspect. So when we're here to talk about the capabilities that we can provide to Saudi Arabia, we know that just providing those defense capabilities, that's not enough. We need to partner with the local community. We're partnering with the industrial places here, and making sure that what we do is engaged across the board. And we do that through various ways. We have joint ventures, we invest in human capital, we cut across the board to include industrial participation and supply chain. We want to be a part of that whole infrastructure.
Human capital is an interesting arm of investment, because obviously you can have the capabilities, but you need the people to have the know-how. So how challenging is that? How interesting is that? And how important is it to Boeing?
Well, it's extremely important and extremely interesting. So when we're investing in high-tech research. We're investing across the board, again, with workforce training, making sure that when we bring our capabilities here and we bring that partnership here, that we also have trained the people, and that those folks are ready to join that part of the aerospace business. We also do a lot with the local communities here. For example,
Ratron, a UK-based advanced defense technology company, has entered into a strategic agreement under which it will be acquired by Ondas. A move the company says will accelerate its global growth as a provider of long-range autonomous defense systems. The agreement positions Ratron to expand its reach across UK, NATO, and allied markets while integrating and #8230. The American Chamber of Commerce in China chairman says this year's expected Trump-Xi meetings can put countries on a visionary path. CSS 1 need color, inherit, font weight, inherit, font size, inherit, font family, inherit, line height, inherit. In January, James Zimmerman returned to the American Chamber of Commerce in China, AmCham China, as its chairman. He previously served in that role for 4 one-year terms in 2007, 2008, 2015, and 2016. A lawyer by training and a resident of China for 28 years, Zimmerman has witnessed the rise of the world's second-largest economy.
تحدث
San Diego. The fiscal 2027 defense budget could double the number of ships the Navy is set to procure under the fiscal 2026 defense budget. Navy Secretary John Phelan said during a keynote address at the West Conference in San Diego, California, on Thursday. While the 2026 budget allotted $2 billion for the Navy to build 17 ships, Phelan said President Donald Trump's proposed fiscal 2027 defense budget of $1 5 trillion could bump that number up to at least 34, with a large contingent of auxiliary and support ships. It is an area that we are in grave need of upgrading, and I think the president has correctly addressed that in the budget, Phelan said. The Navy Secretary said that the effort would help rebuild the maritime industrial base by focusing on the construction of ships that are easier to build than combat ships, which require complicated radar systems and nuclear propulsion systems. The 2026 budget allocated money for vessels that include 2 Virginia-class fast attack submarines, 1 Columbia-class ballistic missile submarine, 3 medium landing ships, and 1 U.S Ocean surveillance ship, according to the House Appropriations Committee. The news came as Phelan answered audience questions after delivering opening remarks that criticized the Biden administration for underfunding the shipbuilding industry and praised the arrival of the Golden Fleet. XPM's think tank urges more drilling and fewer renewables, ignoring evidence that clean energy is cheaper and better for bills. A think tank with close ties to Saudi Arabia and substantial funding from a Donald Trump ally needs to present a particularly robust analysis to earn the right to be listened to on the climate crisis. On that measure, Tony Blair's latest report fails on almost every point. The Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, TBI, received money from the Saudi government, has advised the United Arab Emirates petrostate, and counts as a main donor Larry Ellison, the founder of Oracle, friend of Trump and advocate of AI. The latest TBI report calls for an expansion of oil and gas production in the North Sea, despite the additional greenhouse gas emissions this would generate, and abandoning the UK government's target to largely decarbonize the electricity sector by 2030, arguing that doing so is necessary to power AI data centers. The report claims renewable energy is too expensive. Yet this overlooks the fact that it is significantly cheaper than building the gas-fired power stations that would be needed instead. New onshore wind has been agreed at a price of £72 per megawatt-hour and new solar at £65 MWh, both less than half the £147 per megawatt-hour cost of building